To conclude my bachelor degree in interpreting and translation, I decided to focus on peace and international security, challenges and perspectives of the United Nations peacekeeping operations. Although there is no a universal definition of peacekeeping, we can define it, paraphrasing Secretary General Boutros Ghali, as an invention of the United Nations that has made possible to prevent conflicts and restoring peace through the intervention of a neutral force with respect to the belligerent parties, aimed at limiting hostilities between states. In almost 60 years of conflict resolution, the UN peacekeeping operations have undergone a series of transformations that have influenced their definition and structure. This paper will consider the classification provided by the classical doctrine, according to which we have three different generations of peacekeeping on the basis of the historical period and the purposes for which the operations were intended. In this regard, we talk about operation of first generation, second generation, and third generation. The United Nations military personnel consist of the so-called blue helmets from the color of their helmet. Today, there are almost 90,000 members from national armies all over the world. Peacekeeping operations also involve police forces and civilian volunteers who assist the blue helmets in their operations. The range of activities to pursue international peace and security is very broad, and that is the reason why experts talk about multidimensional United Nations peacekeeping operations. Today, the modern peacekeeping needs to cope with many arduous challenges. In fact, in the attempt to establish a long-term peace in a country torn by a conflict, the UN missions also aimed at pursuing other fundamental goals while respecting the territory and the rights of its inhabitants. And in this regard, we talk about conflict prevention, which is the first task. It aims through structural measures to ensure that internal conflicts do not result in violent conflicts. Protecting civilians pursuant to the resolution of the Security Council number 1265 and 1297, which were focused on civilian protection in conflicts. Then we have promoting human rights and strengthening the rule of law in respecting of the principle of equality of every human being, and finally empowering women, respecting the principle of gender equality, particularly expressed in the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, in which all the member states recognize the impact of war on women and their contribution to conflict resolution for a long-lasting peace. Every peacekeeping operation has a social, economic, but especially an environmental impact. And for the entire UN personnel, this is a crucial aspect to keep in mind in order to avoid that their actions can have a negative effects on civilians and on the hosting territory. Creating eco-friendly mission is therefore the UN peacekeeping frontier. With the slogan Greening the Blue, the United Nations Environment Programme, hereinafter UNEP, is trying to raise the awareness among UN personnel in the field of environment, encouraging it to make sustainable choices during the missions, reducing waste and emissions, and protecting the environment in which operates. In a report which is dedicated to the effect of the United Nations peacekeeping operations on natural resources and environment, UNEP pointed out that the UNIFIL mission, for example, is the mission that has made the most effective progress in the field of environmental protection, thanks to initiatives ranging from the use of electric cars and the use of sustainable energy. Planning a peacekeeping operation is very complex, but we can divide each peacekeeping operation into three major phases, which are startup, implementation of the mandate, and transition. Each phase, of course, has its own characteristics and challenges. The United Nations created an integrated mission planning process with the aim of facilitating the planning of a multidimensional peacekeeping operation. We know for a fact that for a peacekeeping mission to be successful, it is essential to have an approach that can integrate the various actors, including the civil society and the national authorities. Although peacekeeping operations have evolved in the last decades, there are still three fundamental principles that have characterized them since their birth, and these principles, defined by Bellamy and Williams as the Holy Trinity, are consent of the parties, impartiality, and non-use of force except for legitimate defense or defense of the mandate. In the last part of my document, I decided to focus on the ultimate UN peacekeeping operations frontier, which is the safeguarding of cultural heritage. The destruction of archaeological sites, monuments, and books has a millenary story full of countless examples, so it's not a Daesh invention. Throughout the history, this practice has been one of the most powerful weapons available, used to mortify the cultural identity of people. We can think, for example, about the destruction of Palmyra, Nimrud, and Aleppo in the last years from ISIS. The UN and its agency UNESCO are working every day to provide protection of cultural heritage, openly condemning the destruction of those sites as a crime against humanity. Thanks to the new technologies, a lot of Palmyran monuments have been reconstructed with the 3D techniques. Also, Italy has played a fundamental role in this field, making us very proud. In underlining the inevitable limits of my research, I decided to conclude this paper considering both the positive and negative aspects of the UN peacekeeping operations. Although those operations have not always been successful in their purpose, as evidenced by the genocides in Rwanda and Srebrenica, we must recognize this organization's some indisputable merits. For example, it has been the first organism to succeed in the attempt to introduce into the international system a spirit of collective responsibility and cooperation among states. In addition to this, the theoretical studies on peace operations have shown that peacekeeping operations can provide the most appropriate institutional framework, facilitating democratization processes and strengthening the rule of law and respect for human rights. Furthermore, the civilian component taking part in these operations as volunteers can mitigate the impact of the military presence on the territory. We are living in a period in which we are facing a common destiny, and we can master it only if we work together. And that's why we have the United Nations, as said by former Secretary General Kofi Annan.